Flow.
And then I'm just going to turn the video off if it gets too choppy so that the internet smooths out. Are you okay with that as well? Or you want to keep the video on?
That's less fun.
I know. Well, let's keep it on and see if it doesn't stall out or anything. But I think that it should work out just fine. It just will be a little bit lagged.
Okay, but I think, yeah, in the recording, it'll be not laggy. But yeah, I gotta be honest with you guys, it's not that much fun to talk to a black box. But even just seeing folks in the room, that's helpful. That's more fun. But we gotta do what we gotta do. Okay, so it's my understanding you've had your breakfast, you're fueled up, and that's really good because I'm hopefully going to exercise a little bit of your mental capacity today. Plant lots of seeds. We're not going to solve anything in this talk, but should you take up the cry to continue to consider the dimensions of decolonization, yoga, how we offer our offerings in the world, then you might catch the vibe that this is a lifetime of work. This is something that we're going to do parallelly as we cultivate whatever it is we're interested in cultivating, whether it is our physical practice, whether we're interested in the cultivation of meditative practice, if we're interested in something called enlightenment, liberation, and whatever model that is in. So this is really a talk that is a practicum in ethics. So I'm going to give a little introduction to myself. We're going to do a little centering and grounding at the start that's related to the topics itself. And then I have a few core points that I want to get through in this discussion. I'm also very interested if you have questions, whether those questions are clarification type questions on any terms or ideas that I present, questions that you may have already brought to this talk, Decolonizing Yoga. Maybe this is something that's on your radar. Maybe this is something you've never thought about before. I'd like you to know that that's okay if you haven't thought about it before, because we're gonna think about it now. That's the thing. The reason I'm recording this talk is because I've heard from past participants that this is a helpful talk to go back over. So we'll have that resource for you. So friends, welcome. My name is Yoli. My pronouns are she, her. I'm reaching out to you today from the lands of the Yakima people. And long ago, the Mayan people had a name for this area, and it was Seatl, meaning first water. And I am in the region of the Central Cascade Mountains. People have been living in these lands for a very long time. Seatl, or first water, was the first unfrozen settlement when ancestors crossed the Bering Straits and then came into new lands. And as you continue down southward towards what is Mayan land in Mexico, in the Yucatan and the regions from there, there was first water and second water and third water, and continuing all the way down to there, the heart of things in the middle there, or the middle between the continents, or the tail of Turtle Island. So when we allow ourselves to reimagine land and relationship to land, what we may discover is an enhanced relationship to ourselves, to our bodies, and to the other inhabitants of those lands. Like right now, you are on the lands of Native peoples. I do not know the names of those peoples, and I can acknowledge that I don't know. There are peoples who are the Native peoples of the land where I am, whose names that we do not know, but we can just pause for a moment and feel into our own bodies as part of the landscape itself. And this is the heart of everything I'm going to talk to you about today. This practice is also the heart of decolonization itself, which is a revival, an uncoupling, a shedding of systems, intentional systems that oppress, that are divisive. And those intentional systems, part of how they promote and propagate themselves is to separate you from your body and to thus separate you from the land itself. So I want to bring you into today a little indigenous framework, indigenous view. And right from the start, I will say that we all possess something called indigeneity, which is the indigenous consciousness that lives within all of us, as we are all indigenous to the land of Mother Earth. We can start to get a little muddled when we're thinking about bloodline and ancestry and who has what and what associations and cultural appropriation. We'll get at all that a little bit down the line. So even before I introduce myself, I think more important is to connect to land and body. So I just want to offer you a tiny ritual, a tiny breath in the form of a land acknowledgement. So if you're game, whatever position you're currently in, that looks perfect. Is there any way to adopt that position so that you can access your breath even better? And there's no, you did not hear me say sit up straight or, lengthen the chest. Who knows? Maybe your best option for accessing your breath is in the fetal position on the floor right now. There's no one right way. The invitation is simply, what is the best position right now for you to access your breath? And if you like to close your eyes, that's nice. If you want to keep the eyes open, that is equally nice. In this moment, the invitation is connect to your breath. We're not changing anything in any way. We really and truly are just connecting. And this is a first layer of checking in. How are you breathing today? Is the breath accessible? Where is the breath open, flowing? Where is the breath not open and flowing? Without any sense of judgment, without changing anything, observing the quality of inhale and the quality of exhale. The placement of the breath. Is it way up in the chest? Are you somewhere in the middle? Are you breathing to the navel? Does the breath descend? It doesn't matter. You don't have to judge. Oh, my breath is so bad. Might be smelly. Who knows what you ate for breakfast? But your breath is perfect as the way it is. Now just allow the breath to descend towards the bottom of the ribs. Each inhale reaching comfortably, not pressuring, just naturally at the rim of the pelvic bowl. Through the navel. In and around the organs. Digestive organs, reproductive organs. We're reaching towards the base of the pelvic bowl, arriving all the way to this bird's nest at the base of the pelvic bowl. And now dwelling here at the base of the pelvic bowl, using a little bit of imagination, you're going to reach through as if you could reach down from Muladhara Chakra, if you could reach all the way down the legs, the feet, whatever are the parts of the body connecting to the floor, reaching down and into the earth below. As if you could feel into the earth below, this moist, welcoming, warm, nourishing. Your hands, fingers can just move with ease. The soil is so perfect, fertile. And while we're connecting to the earth of this body and the earth of the land in this moment, we acknowledge the ancestors of the land where our bones are currently resting. We acknowledge those that we can name. In my place are the Yakama peoples and the many peoples whose names we do not know, those that have walked so long ago. It is because of these stewards of the land, because of these ancestors of the land, that we are here. We are able to connect with wisdom traditions. We are able to connect with body. We are able to connect to truths of things because we are of this land. It might be something new for you, but if it feels delightful to even connect to the ancestors of family and bloodline and chosen relations and contracts and all sorts of associations, we come into an expanded state, something like a plural version of ourselves. And as you return to your own body, take note of the breath. Take note of the feeling after we connect. Gently opening the eyes and taking in the space around you and the feeling of opening yourself up to the space around you. And just check in. What feels different? What happens when we just pause and connect to the land of this body and the land below? And we acknowledge the caretakers, the stewards of the land, that which we have inherited from, and how we are held and nurtured and connected. And this is the place from which we want to explore a healing and transformative process known as decolonization. Welcoming you back to the space in any way that feels good for you. You're very welcome to meet your needs. The right of refuge is real. Whatever will allow you to receive the things I'm going to share. Some topics that may be comfortable, some topics that may elicit discomfort. Some things you may feel you know, some things you may be willing to admit you do not know. But my request is, can we get curious about the things that we do not know? I think this is a pretty important talk. And so my request was that we do this towards the end of your yoga training as you're starting to consider, perhaps. I don't know your backgrounds and things, so I don't know what you already do and how this yoga teacher training is fitting into what you may offer in the world or your space holding for others. So I have to run on some assumptions that you care about teaching yoga to people. And that's probably what you're going to do, though you may not. You may be in a teacher training to deepen your own practice like this. So I want to give you a little background on myself. My name is Yoliyogini. I think I said that. My pronouns are she, her. My name is in an indigenous language, is in Lakota Sioux language. And in English, my name means she whose words are heard. So I like to talk and teach and think. I teach at the collegiate level. I teach comparative religion, cultural anthropology, and global studies. And my degree is in comparative religious ethics. What I do in my work is compare indigenous wisdom traditions. I put them in conversation with one another. In that conversation, a restoration, a possibility of restoration emerges, as well as a third space. So I'm very much about the preservation of indigenous spiritual practice and spiritual teachings. And I show up in the world at an intersection of indigenous way, healing arts, and social justice. The healing arts that I practice, I'm in year 24 of a hands-on healing practice. Yoga therapy is one of my modalities, as well as many forms of body work. These days, everything is housed in Shiatsu, East Asian system. So I have studied South Asian system, East Asian system, tantras, Buddhist tantras, as well as I'm raised in my family's indigenous spiritual tradition. So we are the Wolf Clan of the Seneca Nation. There are 8 clans: Wolf Clan, Bear Clan, Beaver Clan, Snipe Clan, Deer Clan, like this, Turtle Clan. And the Wolf Clan are the healers and spiritual teachers of the nation. So I've lived a very extraordinary life, raised in a spiritual and healing tradition. I learned many, many things in that experiential lineage type setting. And then I went on to continue to study. I lived in India for a total of 12 years and 3 weeks, because I'm going to count those 3 weeks. And I'm originally from Chicago in the United States. And I'm currently traveling and adventuring with my son, who is 11. We homeschool, world school at the moment. And we're just in the life at the moment, doing our thing. So my healing practice has some specialization that grew, I don't know, organically from day one. I work with very difficult to treat situations. So autoimmune, chronic conditions, unexplainable, undiagnosable, untreatable, grief, loss, birth, traumatic birth loss, and then a lot of spiritual dimensions of things. There's not a lot of medicine people anymore. So, when somebody's like, we need a good old exorcism, there's not a lot of people to call these days. So you would be really surprised. And so how many exorcisms? So I don't know. I will just go into the pits of hell to be with somebody. That's just my commitment in things. And I've always worked in community organizing, particularly around youth development. So working with youth. I also, specialize in things with youth. And this world of, whether we want to call it DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, or any other acronyms, DEIJ, DEIB, ESG, whatever people have come up with nowadays. This isn't what I set out to teach, but with that sort of confluence of my areas of expertise, particularly global studies and cultural anthropology, that's a lot of what academically comprises DEI study. I am far more interested in solutions, in the processes of healing, restoration, and transformation. And so my call in, like what really revs my engine are the concepts around healing justice, restorative justice, and transformative justice. And for me, why I'm here giving this talk, like why bother, is because I know how important the yogic tools are in healing justice, restorative justice, and transformative justice journeys. I have all the respect in the world for the amount of theoretical study that we've done into the social construct of difference. Other synonyms, including the capitalist imperialist paradigm, a system of white supremacy or whiteness that enforces a status quo of white cultural values and norms. Those are all synonyms for the same pervasive system that oppresses us all. There is not anyone who is exempt from this oppression, actually. And so we can theorize about it until we're blue in the face. And I'm pretty sure collectively we're very blue in the face, because the solution doesn't live in the theory and analytics of the problem. But we do need the exercise of defining the problem. We can't solve the problem unless we've defined the problem. And in defining the problem, that's very uncomfortable, because we have to look at ourselves. And we humans, we modern day humans, we don't want to look at the ugliness that lives within us. That's not anything we're looking for. We're looking for pleasure. We're looking for enjoyment. Or maybe we're looking for fame and fortune and recognition, or we're looking for really wonderful, comfortable, accumulative wealth, right? That's what's going to make us so happy. We're going to be stinking rich. And that's going to solve everything until we start aging. Oh, gosh. They lied. It's lies. Until you're on your deathbed, trying to take it all with you. So sad. Right? So we're out here. I mean, is it any wonder why we get so tired? It's so hard to live in a system that works against all aspects of your naturality. And it relies on us being separated. The system relies on us being separated from our bodies in order to continue to promote itself. Equally, it relies on us being separated from the earth itself. Because if we were connected to our bodies, and thus our natural connection to the earth was alive and well, I don't know, think Avatar movies, what a beautiful analogy. This system is able to survive because we are separated from our bodies. So for me, any somatics, any body-based wisdom practices like the system of yoga is certainly going to be a part of the solution. But we have a little work to do, because we also need to decolonize yoga itself. Because this pervasive capitalist imperialist system has also colonized the yoga tradition and is actively working on that continued colonization of the yogic system. So I will name some of these things and give some examples and things like that. But I want to name here that this is an ethics class. And how do you do ethics? Most of us are familiar with morals, dogmas, norms, meaning pre-decided dictums, instructions, they're dictated to you, the dictum. And it's already been decided that they are right and just, and this is what we follow, and this is going to make us better and good, or how most moral systems are taught within religious systems. Then there's going to be some connotation to, your proximity to the divine and what may happen at the moment of your death. Like, well, that sounds pretty serious. We better follow those rules, right? That's the domain of morals. And we are a little beyond that when we're doing ethics. I would say a little bit more related to even philosophy and philosophizing, where we are asking questions that generate more questions. If we're doing ethics right, we're asking a lot of questions, and we are getting curious. If we're approaching ethics from a viewpoint of, I have to get it right. How do I get it right? Or its cousin, how do I not muck this up? That's not ethics. So sometimes we get into the matter, the substance in this talk, and then we're towards the end of the talk, and somebody asks, Yoli, just tell me, like, how do I not muck it up? Just tell me what to do. I've also had organizations, schools, companies, studios, whoever they are, do the same thing from a consulting point of view. Can you just tell us how to get this right? We want to have more of somebody in this space that we don't normally have. We want to center, we want to do right by this. We don't want to be performative. It's not about rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter signs. Like, how do we actually move this needle? That's a lot more complex. What it involves is a parallel effort of you examining yourself and how these systems are alive, promoting within you. And we also want to look at the systems themselves, including a knowledge system such as yoga is. And we need to then also address, okay, how are these aspects of this social construct of difference, of this oppressive system, showing up in this teaching itself? So we've got ourselves, we have the businesses and organizations that we're going to teach within. I don't know, maybe you're teaching in a good old church basement, old school thing. Maybe you teach online. Maybe you're going to be teaching with refugees in a social service setting. Maybe it's a good old studio thing. Maybe your thing is just like wellness retreats, right? But so you've got settings and spaces, also organizations like this. So we have this dimension of individual. We have this dimension of the space itself or the business itself. We named the dimension of the teachings. And then we could probably also keep going and name some other things. But for now, that sounds like a lot of work. Just those three dimensions. So decolonization. I was, kind of like rolling along with the DEI things and the DEI language and doing the things. And when I was getting curious about, even the teachings and consulting that I was doing, I realized that there's so many voices in the marketplace of ideas speaking to the theory and the story of how this system came into being, how it's promoted and propagated, how it survives. What I'm naming for us is that it relies on our separation and amnesia. for its survival, it relies on us forgetting. And being all busy about all those things I joked about, whether it was like wealth or beauty or whatever, longevity, whatever it is. And decolonization is a process. It's a how, right? So that story is the what. Decolonization is a how. It's a process. And decolonization has always been the domain of indigenous peoples. And what indigenous peoples have done for themselves is develop a system to unshackle themselves from the colonialist, settler colonial systems that have been imposed on them, their cultural traditions, and thus a threat to their sovereignty or right of self-determination, literally meaning their right to exist. So to repeat that, the right to exist of indigenous peoples has been under extreme threat by the systems of colonization. Decolonization is the process that indigenous people developed for themselves to throw off those shackles, to deprogram, because part of the insidiousness of the colonialist capitalist system is how it gets programmed in and reinforced into all aspects of this body, mind, spirit being. So decolonization is the generosity of indigenous peoples. First and foremost, we must tell its origin story. Decolonization for all of us is a process of recognition and recognizing how systems of biases exist when we're using that very academic speech of the social construct of difference. What we are describing in the social construct of difference is that we all are born into a system that describes a hierarchy of bodies. And that hierarchy of bodies is whose body is more worthy and whose body is fodder for labor. And if we happen to be down the pyramidal structure and we exist in it's like an amalgam of identities or intersectional identities, right? Where multiple identities, this is the thing about being a human. It's one of our superpowers, this multiplicity thing. We have the capacity to hold multiple truths. It is a human superpower. We are also multidimensional beings. You've been learning about it. Panchakosha model, 5 layers, 5 dimensions of the body. We're very unique creatures. And then somehow this system, it's not a somehow, there's a story. This system has now been enforced and imposed upon everybody, all beings, because the beavers and the bears and the insects and the fish, they are also oppressed by this system. The trees are oppressed. The rocks are oppressed. The earth can't even not be drilled for, fracking and oil and whatnot. Like literally the substances of the earth, our relations, interrelations are equally oppressed in the system. This social construct of difference, until we take the pain and discomfort to learn and analyze how it works, we unfortunately uphold it. Our ignorance, our not knowing, doesn't give us a pass. It just means we're part of upholding a system that oppresses us all, and we don't know it. It's sort of like a double whammy. We are raised to have biases. Once upon a time, those biases were rooted in our survival. That was a hell of a long time ago, though. Nowadays, these intergenerational biases are the very things that are very tools of exploitation that are used. They are so well reinforced through systems of prize and punishment that we don't even know we have them anymore. And that's when we're describing implicit bias, the internalized biases that we have. What do we mean when we're saying biases? That someone is better than another, safer than another, more worthy than another. Worthy of praise? Oh, that's mild in comparison to worthy of the right of self-determination or not, right? This gets very serious when we start talking about the free labor systems of chattel slavery, indentured servitude, forced migration, and the like. So decolonization presents us with an opportunity to see ourselves. That's so yogic. That's so spiritual, no matter what systems we may be interacting with. This is all about the capacity for us to hold up a mirror and see ourselves. This. And maybe what we see is not that pretty. Maybe what we see is that, oh, we uphold the system. Maybe what we see is that we have a type of an amalgam of identities that allows us to highly benefit from this system. We can all be sitting in a room together, even a virtual Zoom room together, and we are all having radically different experiences, just like how all of our bodies look radically different from one another. We can be in the same space. We could be in the same yoga space. We could be experiencing the same class, the same weather. We're breathing the same air and oxygen, and we can be having a radically different experience simply because of the social construct of difference and the burdensome stories that we're carrying along with them. So without taking a look at what's internalized, when we are peoples who come, whose amalgam of identities is rather marginalized, right? So we describe this center space. And the center space and the social construct of difference is the place to be at. That's where you want to be. Some of us are born into the center space. We didn't have to do anything. It was preordained for us. Right? We were born into the center space. And what everybody else is supposed to be doing in this system is grappling for proximity to the center space. What lives in the center space? Power. What lives all the way at the edges in the bleacher seats? Exploitation. Not power. Most of us are somewhere in between. And we're also floating and we're morphing and changing based on our intersectional identity, makeup of our identity. And what that's describing is that we can have, when we do, have multiple aspects that create our identity. And some of those aspects afford us privilege. And some of those aspects afford us the absence of privilege. So for me, in my dynamic makeup of identities, being born with a womb space, being a single parent, being, I don't even know what economic class I'm in these days. We were somewhere in the middle class, you know, and not identifying as Christian. Those things afford me less privilege. And some of the things that afford me more privilege, I am able-bodied. My nationality is the United States. I have a master's degree. I can speak English. I'm sure there's some other things that afford me privilege, but hopefully you're catching some of this idea that I can walk around in the world, live my life, and do my things. And there will be certain settings that I step into where I am automatically knocked down in the privilege or the proximity to center. Of all the aspects of my identity, the thing that affords me the most proximity to the center space is actually my level of education. Right? So when we take a pause, and we come into workshops, I offer a workshop called Decolonization Toolkit. We actually do an exercise in that workshop where we map our privilege. We create a privilege wheel, because sometimes you just need to look at it. You need to actually painstakingly reduce yourself to a two-dimensional image on paper. Because is that any different when I send my resume to that yoga studio for consideration in a teaching position? I've also there reduced myself to paper. I'm still I'm in a very similar game in that sense. I am a far more fascinating three-dimensional being. Yes. And there are more aspects to my being, like feelings, humanity, and empathy, other superpowers. But that's not the world we live in. We live in a pretty harsh and severe world. So we need to take that pause. We need to do that exercise and examine our level of privilege so that we can see better. And this is one of our core questions in this talk. I got like 4 core points. One of them is, how does power and privilege show up in yoga spaces? Because real talk, people, yoga spaces are so flat. They're so not three-dimensional. Yoga spaces are historic spaces designed for one identity amalgam. And the yoga spaces I'm talking about are modern day yoga spaces in Western countries, Western European countries, in the United States, Canada, like this. This is the model that has now been exported to the globe. Whether it's the American studio model, just gonna turn some lights on here, whether it's the model of how a yoga training is stylized, whether I can think I get this. Oh, it's like a halo. Whether that is a model of, I'm just thinking about how power and privilege plays out in yoga settings, typically of like, who gets to teach the class? Who gets to sweep the floor? Right? How labor is exploited in yoga studios. We see the exploitation of work study and volunteerism. How teacher trainings interface with that. That's just on the back end. But who is this yoga space designed for? Who is supposed to be comforted and welcomed when they come in? Well, she is cishet. She's the gender that she's born into, according to the doctors of the hospital. She's largely heterosexual in her sexual orientation. She's fit, she's wealthy, she's definitely able-bodied. She has a huge amount of disposable time and money, the 2 main resources, and I don't know, she's probably not really that interested in depth, but that's a side note. Okay, so what if you're different? What if you're in a body that identifies differently in your gender, in your sexual orientation, I forgot, she's also white. Yeah, she's white also. Forgot, she is way white racially, right? And so what if you are not that, right? How many Black Americans I've spoken to about coming into yoga class and getting this therapeutic and this, and they're like, yoga? That's not for me. hey, like, yeah, what makes you say that? Like, how do you figure that? And they're like, I'm not some rich white lady, and some like pants that she's sewn into, I'm not flexible. These sort of like ableist, no, I can't be like a fat black woman and come to yoga. That space isn't for me. Wow. Well, where did that kind of thinking originate from? That's not, yoga didn't do that. Yoga didn't produce that kind of thinking. That thinking is enforced in the social construct of difference. We have all been indoctrinated with a language of belonging. And that language of belonging is in the description of likeness. You are it's a tribalism. It is a psychology of tribalism. And this tribalism, whoo, God, I don't live in America right now. This tribalism is literally fracturing the society at this moment. We're watching it happen. And in that tribalism, it's really going to come down to a sense of belonging, and a sense of belonging is rooted in a sense of safety. So whether we're talking about neurology and attachment theory, psychology and attachment theory, or neurology and polyvagal theory, we're going to keep bumping up against the same thing, because this is just how it's structured, that we're safe when we're around people who are like us. We're unsafe. This is the programming. We're unsafe when we're around people that aren't like us. Another example, I have a friend and colleague in Chicago. She's the owner of a fabulous yoga space, healing space called the Haji Healing Salon. She herself is a Black woman, and the first Haji Healing Salon she opened in a rough neighborhood of Chicago. And that was her service. She's, I'm gonna plop it right here, 75th and Cottage Grove. Oof. Neighborhood called Chatham. Rough. And she's in the neighborhood she's in. It's a predominantly Black neighborhood of South Side of Chicago. And so it's not just because she's Black. It's because the people who are gonna come into the space, she's in all of her promotional materials on her website and whatnot. You see Black people, you see queer people, you see BIPOC people. Like, that's who's living in the neighborhood. That's who she's serving. That's who she's centering in her work. And she told me, she said, Yoli, it's the funniest thing. You wouldn't believe how many phone calls I field where people call and they say, is your yoga studio only for Black people? Because it just looks really cool and I'd really love to come and check it out. But when I went on the website, all I saw were pictures of Black people. So it's only for Black people, right? She was like, what makes you say that? Like, where is your thinking in that? What virtue signaling are you misreading? That, well, in all honesty, because all we saw were Black people on the website. And we had a good old chuckle about it. Her studio is not for only Black people, because why would she do that? What would be the point of her doing that? And so she's a healer. The space is for everyone. What is it in the programming that if we don't see ourselves in the likeness of those who hold the power in the space? Who holds the power in a teaching space? The teacher. We've all been also indoctrinated into a Western educational model where the teacher is all knowing. The student is all ignorance. The student is an empty vessel for the teacher to fill, right? And so, neat, we're all programmed with this. And so here you are looking at this yoga studio, and in this case of the Haji Healing Salon, seeing a bunch of Black folks doing yoga and acupuncture and healing and sipping tea and all these things. And you, white person from the north side of Chicago, are like, oh, that's not a space for me. So it's not just a one-way street. This is a programming. And this is why it is so critically important that you student, are able to see your likeness in the people who hold the knowledge that are sharing whatever is the knowledge of yoga asana, the knowledge of pranayama, the people who hold the knowledge. Also, you need to be able to identify with them. Now, this is the part where somebody is thinking in their mind, especially the younger folks, because I pop into all the sacred paths training when I give this lecture. So I'll often get a question, but Yoli, isn't it all oneness? Isn't it all universe? There's no color. There's no race. Oh, okay. I mean, all we have to do is go into a place where you don't feel you belong. And you're like, we got to get out of here. So, like, it's so ingrained. Okay, the problem with color blindness, tolerance, homogeny, or what we get in the marketplace of spiritual ideas, bypass, gaslighting, spiritual bypass, false ascension models. You cannot fake your way to any understanding of anything. But this human mind is so powerful. It will believe whatever you tell it. And so if you keep on reinforcing that, nope, there's no race, look, somewhere on some level of consciousness, it's true. All of these identities, these burdensome identities, they do not exist. Right now, we're not having a talk in that Buddha realm. You're in Bali, and I'm in the Central Cascades of Washington State. We are very much in the material world right now, having this conversation within the construct. Now, I don't know, maybe one of you is enlightened, and you're having a little chuckle right now at this whole thing. I don't know. I'll leave a 5% chance for that, because Buddhas do show up in the weirdest places. But I think you can catch my point that we can't engage a transformative process by bypassing our way there. And when you come into a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-oppression training space with that sort of attitude, like, but aren't we all just the same? No, we're not at that place of consciousness having this conversation. Now, I am all for getting to that state of consciousness and simmering, marinating, and immersing in that and transforming myself. Again, the person called Yoli with this amalgam of identities, I am definitely interested in transforming her because these identities are heavy. They are burdensome. They prevent us from accessing our true nature. So the reason I bothered to give this talk is because there is so much potential of us transforming the systems by engaging in this discussion, by analyzing for, okay, what are these areas we need to really be engaging ourselves on? So far, I've really been talking about this, I've talked about healing justice, social justice paradigm, and which is basically transformative work. I've really been talking at length today about the examination of how power and privilege shows up in the space. So when I send Hannah the link for this talk, I'll write out these resources, but there are some fabulous resources that folks have done in the last 3 years that are pretty critically important and need to be on your reading list. One of your most helpful books for examining how power and privilege are showing up in wellness space, in yoga space, is Michelle Cassandra Johnson's Skill in Action. She also has many other resources. It's so fascinating. The second book she wrote, she did a second edition of Skill in Action with a lot more, it's a lot thicker. There's just a lot more activities and things in there. And then the third book she wrote, it's all about grieving, because that's where most people get stuck in this unpacking process. They get paralyzed. They get stuck in the shame and the guilt, the intergenerational shame and guilt. And again, a rally cry here, put in somatic practices. Bring this work into the body. The body is the meeting place of the work. We did an example of it today in the form of a land acknowledgement ritual. As an Indigenous person, I do giggle a little at the culture of land acknowledgements. If this is the thing that you've noticed, like land, they're everywhere, right? Everybody's got a land acknowledgement. Some of them are like page 3, page 4, like holy. I giggle because as an Indigenous person, land acknowledgement is not separate from anything. It's also not a standalone thing. You wake up and you do land acknowledgement. You're eating, you're doing land acknowledgement. You're staring at the stars in the sky, you're doing land acknowledgement. Your existence is land acknowledgement because we have a cosmology that we do not see our bodies as separate from the land itself. So I love the, again, academic effort of the land acknowledgement. What I shared with you today is one of many ways of how you bring the acknowledgement into the body. What did we do? We just connected to the breath. And we connected to the earth of this body. And then we use a little bit of our imagination because our imagination is such an important tool in this decolonization process. Our dreaming, our imagining, our body rootedness, ritual, spirituality, performance, ritual dance. You are in a place where ritual dance is like some of the best in the world, the traditions of Bali, that intersection of spirituality and ritual and dance and performance and costume and makeup, aesthetics, that decolonization. You are connected to land when you connect with these traditions. All we do, we just breathed together, and all of a sudden the whole space felt different. Because in that moment, we're recognizing that we are both individuals and part of a collective at the same time. Like, I put in 12 very serious years in a Buddhist tantric tradition, like full power, we finna meditate and enlighten. And it really wasn't until I left that formality and came into the richness of life itself. Definitely the initiation of motherhood was a part of that. My whole framework of perfection, enlightenment, and liberation transformed. And the thread that we need to bring into the conversation that we're having today is that our collective liberation is totally interconnected. Now, the Buddhist systems, the contemplative systems, they have languages around this where, Bodhisattva's way, the Bodhisattva's vow, we're going to make this commitment to achieving this enlightenment, this liberation experience, but we're not even going to be able to access that liberatory pathway unless we vow to commit to turn around and help everybody else get there. Oh, it's not just humans, it's all sentient beings in the entire universe. I don't know, you guys, they just did the talk about the UFOs. I just read it today. They're like, yep, UFOs are real. We've been tracking them for forever. Like, hello, we already knew that. Also, what does that mean to finally admit it? Wow, that's a lot of sentient beings. For the sake of this conversation, that's a lot of sentient beings. That's a pretty big commitment, right? So we have these systems that even built this check and balance that, like, our liberation is totally interconnected in this social construct of difference. We cannot singularly attain liberation. We have to do it as a collective. Our framework has to be one of a plural identity. Oh, but we're all down here, in the pits of things like my recognition, my wealth, my greed, my sex, my lust, my greed, my this. Oh, it's so off topic. And so this decolonization journey, this is for me a spiritual journey. We can't bypass our way there. We can't imagine or unimagine our way there. Okay. So we've got some obstacles though. One of the biggest obstacles is capitalism. So capitalism is the glue of the social construct of difference. And capitalism has inspired the very severe version of the social construct of difference that we're currently living in. And why is it severe? It feels like it's impossible to change this because, like, could you really and truly financially, economically step out of the system? Could you, okay, I mean, let's walk through this scenario. Could I go and live on a plot of land and homestead? Right. Did I buy that land? Do I own that land? I'm in the system, right? I'm playing into the capitalist model. Okay, I'm going to go way up in the Arctic, like, where that show Alone is shot. And I'm going to be way up in the Arctic and I'm going to just hack it out. And that, like, okay, so is that the only option? Is that really and truly the only place we could go, the only scenario that we have to, like, go contend with the badgers and bears and stuff? This is not sounding, so we're really backed into a corner at the moment. So we can stylize something that's pretty minimalist, but there's not an option currently at the moment to truly step out of the capitalist system. I love the people that are like, but late stage capitalism. I was like, I went into late stage capitalism, I did a big old research into it because I wanted to believe, like, oh, is that real? I want to believe this is going to end. But here's what I found about late stage capitalism. It's really just like a posit of an idea. It's not even a researchable thing. It's like a wish. We can wish that we're at the stage of late stage capitalism. But capitalism and the silly concepts that are at the center of it still promote themselves. Now, the one I want to name that's so critically important in our decolonization journey, because this core concept at the center of capitalism is called the scarcity model. And the scarcity model very simply states that we live in a world of unlimited wants and limited resources. We live in a world of unlimited wants and limited resources. And thus, only some should have access to the resources. And that is how not a very long period of time. I mean, we could start counting from the 1300s. Maybe we could start counting as early as the 1100s, but really from Europe's perspective, it's starting from 1300s Common Era, this global trade, boats, Italians, Marco Polo, the Mongols, that kind of vibe, that this system has been basically the one global economic system. And I gotta be honest with you all, if decolonization is an indigenous worldview, we need to be really clear that scarcity model does not exist in the indigenous imagination. Such an idea cannot come from a body that is connected to the earth. Because the indigenous economic view is an abundance model. There is enough. And statistically, data speaking, 2023, we live in a world, there is enough for everyone. All 8 billion people, as overpopulated as we are, this world, we have already manufactured enough of everything for everyone. Our problem is how the resources are distributed. And the resources are distributed by way of that hierarchical model of who gets to be wealthy, who gets to hold power. And what we need to grow in our understanding is that system is present in all wellness spaces, all yoga spaces, until and unless you name it, address it, and start to dismantle it. So Michelle C. Johnson's book, she gives you a really nice checklist, reflective questions to get you going in the direction of being able to examine very specifically for yoga and wellness spaces. Another very important resource for your journey is Susanna Barkataki's Embrace Yoga's Roots. One of the very important things for us to talk about in a talk on Decolonizing Yoga is the South Asian context. So cultural theft is the proper word for cultural appropriation. And cultural appropriation is yet another tool in the toolkit of the imperialist model. Cultural appropriation is, God said I could do it. Cultural appropriation is linked to manifest destiny, versions of imperialism, the very harsh version of post-Civil War American imperialism, and the neo-imperialisms of the modern day. Cultural appropriation, cultural theft, this is not difficult to remedy. The remedy is in the storytelling. All we have to do is cite our sources. Oh, but we're out here in this capitalist marketplace of ideas. I'm going to come up with my thing. It's going to be goat yoga. It's going to be whatever yoga, pole yoga, trap yoga, this yoga, circus yoga, that one. And then I'm in a true capitalist style. I'm going to slap that trademark on there. It's mine. I just branded it. My brand, your brand, we're all branding. Nobody can survive without branding is the story that we're being told in this moment. Well, what's your brand? You know? And what a detour from the simple solution, which is what's the source? Where is yoga from? Right? Because what happened with yoga in particular was you've got all these wisdom traditions in India, so many branches, beautiful tree and all the branches and all the leaves and all these systems of yoga. And it's going to be Western European, male Western European scholars who will come over here as capitalist imperialists, here meaning to India, you know. They will come to India, they will come to South Asia literally as like British East India Company, as capitalist imperialists. And they will write the books. They will translate. They will try to fit the grand, expansive concepts of the spiritual systems of South Asia into the rigid, unbending language of modern English through the lens of Judeo-Christian rigidity, puritanical rigidity. And so when we say that there's a decolonization of yoga itself that needs to happen, we have many, many people in the global yoga space who are of South Asian origin that are saying, hey, don't you think something's wrong that there's no South Asian people teaching in your yoga space, in your yoga program? in your yoga training? Like, what on earth is happening? So it's like a default mode we have to go into. We need to, without question, support South Asian people's efforts to re-center yoga in the South Asian context. And I'm going to say that, and I'm going to give a yes and. Yoga's origins are even beyond the South Asian continent. Yoga and its essence practice is found in many indigenous traditions of the globe. So for me and my scholarship and what I'm repping personally, it's a yes and. We're going to support Team South Asia. We're going to we're going to decolonize yoga. We're going to center it back in its South Asian context. We can also parallelly do a type of comparative work where we're acknowledging yoga's global origins, its global indigenous roots. We can tell that story too. Where we get all caught up is trying to get it right. Where we get caught up is in absolutes or one right way, one singular answer. Remember, we're multidimensional beings who have the capacity, the superpower to hold multiple truths. It is, once again, broken record, that capitalist imperialist model emerged from the age of the Big E Enlightenment, which emerged from a moment of scientific reasoning. We are stuck in the processes of proof, of data, and scientific reason. And we've sort of misapplied it to many aspects of life. So I really do think Embrace Yoga's Roots and Susanna Barkataki's work is a must read for anyone doing a yoga teacher training. Again, she's got reflective questions, to-do lists, these ethical lines of inquiry for you to really start thinking about, yeah, how can I decolonize my wellness space? And why is that important? Well, why it's important is because we need these tools. This capitalist imperialist system has us very tired. That's part of the design. Also, your sleep has been colonized equally. And so in order to arrive to those transformative possibilities, we have to be rested enough to access states of healing in the body. And when we apply these tools that are body-centered, we are able to do a work that is, it's like fractal. Small engagement will replicate into big revolutionary level change. Maybe you've experienced this in your own life through your yoga practice. Maybe you're already a teacher of something and you've seen this happen where somebody comes in. I remember a particular military veteran who had come into yoga class, and first time he was very nervous because he didn't see anybody else in that yoga class that looked like him. And myself, the teacher, also didn't look like him. I don't have a military background. I'm not a man. I don't have, combat PTSD. Yes, it's quite a stretch, right? And I said, look, I know yoga though. You come in and you take what you need and leave the rest. And he did it was very painful and he's sweating and all the things, a lot of, ama toxins in the body and this. And then we did Shavasana, we did Yoga Nidra. We did a nice Yoga Nidra at the end of the class. And he got up from the Yoga Nidra and he felt something in that moment. But he was already so uncomfortable in the space. He just got his stuff and left, like, cool, no pressure. I'm not going to be all like, tell me everything. He came back the next day and he was like a completely different person. He said, I slept last night. Like, I haven't slept in years. And me being able to sleep gave me hope. Then he became card carrying. And so I think we had a program at the studio that time that offered a year membership, like because we wanted them to come and be committed to come. My man was there every day, like sometimes multiple classes in a day. And like that aha moment, that moment where it was so uncomfortable, it's so out of the comfort zone, this awesome, so this thing, and we get to the other side and it is radically and wildly transformative, right? It's not whatever we said, it's really just the power of this practice and this yogic science, this indigenous practice, this indigenous wisdom. So maybe you have had your yogic aha moments that have led you to this place where you're like, I want to share this practice with others. We started an organization in Chicago called the Socially Engaged Yoga Network. It was just a network. And how it all was birthed was from taking yoga out of the studio and bringing it to the people. And we literally took out a map of Chicago, which is basically like a big rectangle. And we drew a rectangle of where you could access yoga. And it was a little rectangle within the bigger rectangle of the third largest city in America. We said, let's start addressing this. We know yogic practice can help people. We know that we could see yogic practice reduce violence, youth violence, as a mode of care and health care, healing care, of mental health care. We know this, we believe in this, we got to get this yoga to the people. Well, now that good impetus, that's good and just and right and all the things, everything's pointing in the right direction, except we hadn't decolonized ourselves, our practices, or our offerings. And so here we were, people from affluent neighborhoods going down into the hood, delivering yoga, leaving, feeling real good about ourselves. Pat, 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 on the back. And that was it. Sometimes those programs were one and done. Whoa, God, we feel real good about those. I don't even have to go back. It was scary. Right? And we said, we could do better. How do we do better? Okay, the problem is who holds the knowledge and who doesn't hold the knowledge. And so then the next step in our growth was to develop teacher training programs that were culturally relevant, to grow teachers from the neighborhoods themselves that did not have access. So we're talking about accessibility, inclusion, and diversity, right? We're literally going to diversify the pool of teachers. They are going to teach in culturally relevant ways to their own people, their own neighbors. And we've been running this program ever since. We have the Socially Engaged Yoga Network, and we have a nonprofit named Yoga Care. And what we do with Yoga Care, aside from running that teacher training program, is we bring yoga programs into community healthcare settings in both English and Spanish language. We also ran the first Spanish language yoga teacher training 2 years ago now. It kind of finished up during the pandemic. It was weird. Like this. So we can be well-intentioned, we can have conviction, and our hearts can be all in the right places. And until we decolonize the project itself, the yoga itself, wow, we may have created harm. We may have harmed people like this. So when we're talking about this dimension of healing justice, restorative justice, what we're talking about is harm reduction. We want to create yogic spaces that mitigate harm. You heard it on my lips. I almost want to say do not harm. We can't guarantee that. It'd be so cool if we could. We can't guarantee that, but we can make our commitments. We can create and explore ethics, accountability, how we hold ourselves accountable, how the community can hold us accountable. We can talk about our failure and our growth, and we can be vocal about it, not as an excuse. but as a community-based, transparent practice of accountability. That's at the heart of transformative process. Our fallibility. I like this. So I'm just looking over these little notes that I keep like this. You know, there's other avenues that we could go down. There's other things that we can embellish on in this talk, like how grind culture shows up in yogic spaces, how unsustainable the business of yoga is for everyone who's participating in it. There are other aspects of, yeah, like everything we've named today deserves time to go deeper. In review, there's actually 4 core points that I've been talking at, in, around, and to today. 4 core elements of decolonizing yoga. Number 1 is centering the origins of yoga in their South Asian and or indigenous global context. That's our antidote to the whitewashing of yoga and the reduction of the substance of yoga to a better butt. So sad. Number 2, big talk today, real important thing that you're going to go deeper into. How does power and privilege show up in the space? How are you silently or ignorantly upholding it? Third piece is this rest paradigm capitalism in position. If we're too tired to do the work, if we're in our own healing journey, then triage. Be in your healing journey. Get resourced for the bigger journey. Your practice is your way to do that. Make sure you are resting, rejuvenating, and processing. And that last piece is a framework, an idea of healing justice and social justice. Once upon a time, it was actually with Yoga Care, and it was actually, the year was 2016, that we decided as the people stewarding the organization that we wanted to start using a more blatant politicized language. And that was the real separating of the water and the oil, of the balsamic and the oil, because there were people that were like, no, yoga needs to be a politic-free zone. And then there was the rest of us that were like, how do you figure that? Like, what kind of false thing? Like, if you're born in a body that's disabled, if you're born in a body with a womb space, like, your body literally is the political object on earth. How can you tell me I identify as a Black Indigenous woman? How can you tell me as a Black Indigenous woman that, like, my body, how I connect to my body has to be separate from a political discourse? Maybe when I'm in my living room, that's true. But the second I step outside that door, that thing evaporates. I am now part of a social construct of difference. I'm not Yoli with a story and feelings. No, I am now a classification in a system. And the question is, how much can my body be exploited? Yuck. When you read Michelle Johnson's book, she's going to speak to something, she's going to say something very similar of the ridiculousness of that idea. Needless to say, those people didn't stay on stewarding the organization. We've kept going, and we have deepened our ethical inquiry, our process of asking questions, of inviting people in to stimulate the conversation and get us thinking in terms of all sorts of aspects of how somatic tools, embodied tools, have to be at the center of all social justice movements. So, my friends, Do you have any questions at this time?
Well, definitely while they process all of that amazing goodness and yumminess, I think I just want to say that every time I've gotten to hear you share and attend one of your lessons, I'm always very inspired, and I want to appreciate you for the work that you've done, because I'm sure it's not easy, and we are very grateful for you.
You know, thank you. And I use those yogic tools and those breath tools. I use those meditative tools and those contemplative tools. That's what gives me the energy to keep going. I stay engaged and I'm willing to fail. I'm willing to get it wrong. And then I'm willing to take accountability for that. So I'll put some little follow-up links. I'll put links to my own stuff. You can see what I'm up to. I'm pretty like nonstop. I've always got something decolonization wise that you can plug into, whether it's a class or a talk or just me getting on IG Live and like giggling into the into the phone or what have you. Um, I have a training called Decolonization Toolkit. We'll be running one in November, again in sometime I think in spring or summer of next year. But really, I'm always cooking up something to just keep us engaged. Again, my intersection is wellness and social justice and this indigenous view, indigenous preservation. I don't think we can exhaust the work. We can get exhausted. I've done that a few times, and there's a lot of storytelling around that too. So also, don't hesitate to email me with questions as they come up, because see, we all have different processing rhythms, you know. So I want you to know that I'm available for your quests, and it's always a pleasure. I trust that you feel like I got a few things to ponder and think about. And I do also want to name that I think that there's a way to do this journey that is fun and playful and um, generative. Were you going to ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Thank you so much for your lecture. So much of it, not all of it, with me personally. I was curious. I mean, I have two burning questions, but I'll ask the one that might be most useful for everyone. You mentioned that, I really appreciated your inquiry of ethics, that we ask questions that produce more questions, essentially, that we don't have all the answers and we don't arrive at them. Many of the topics that you spoke about, it seems like you've landed, at a place for yourself personally that you've recognized where you stand right now.
Mhm.
I'm curious if there's any questions that you're wrestling with nowadays that maybe like stand unanswered, and that maybe you're continuing to wrestle with, that you don't really know where to stand.
That's a great question. Um, I can't put any of it down. I am constantly wrestling with um, how do we move the needle? That's one of my main questions. Is I a lot of questions I ask about myself. How can I be making my best contribution? How can I be energy efficient in that? Where are the places that I can keep growing? What's the things that I don't see in myself? You know, how can I get into collaborative settings where I can see something about myself that I cannot see in this moment? And that's very much that cultural anthropology, like it's also Abhidharma, Buddhist psychology. It's how we see ourselves in others. Um, I ponder a lot of very macro, like kind of big macro things. Like I want to change systems. I want to change the educational system. I want to change the governance system. So a lot of my questions right now are around like, okay, how do we get there? And I know that the answer lives in the systems of nature. I know that the answers live in the fractal epistemology, the mathematics and geometry of nature itself. So when I don't know the answer to something, I go into nature to observe systems and arisings because I believe nature is a perfect system. And that, like, well, how does nature solve that? And then how can I condense it into a small capsule form that then will replicate itself? I'm looking for less effort because I've already tried ways that have a lot of effort and then I got burnt out pretty hardcore. That's not going to work either. So those are some of the things that just come off the top of my mind. But if I was going to drill down into topics specifically, then it's kind of like whatever I'm researching and into at the moment. But right now, everything's a little like a meditation and esoterics. I'm really in deep right now. Like actually, I'm finishing a course called Decolonization and the Goddess, reimagining intersectionality. And it's not exclusively for women or female identifying people, but it's all women in the space right now, and female identifying people. And we are deep in yogic and tantric and Buddhist teachings on how the identity is formed and thus how you dismantle it. And we have like a set of goddesses that we're exploring. These goddess archetypes are called the Dasha Mahavidyas, the 10 wisdom mothers. And so we're rooted in this indigenous Shakta Tantra teaching while we are butting up against and exploring contradictions and paradoxes. Because I think this question, like when we take question asking and remove it from the constriction of scientific method and scientific reasoning, then we ask questions because they lead us on this journey into an unfolding. And that is very much the parallelly what I have experienced in my own meditative path of cultivation. It's like one thing, it's the unfolding of the lotus, like one thing unfolds into the next. So right now I'm deep in identity constructs is like my topic at the moment. So I love this question because I don't even know the full answer to it. It's gonna make me think about, yeah, what are the questions I'm not able to answer right now. I'm gonna sit with this one even longer and keep thinking about it. So thank you. What was the other burning question? It's burning.
So it's actually fascinating that you kind of took the path that you did in your answer, because it kind of tied with my follow-up question, I think at least a little bit. Like a lot of the inherent beliefs in Tantra, that like in what you embody and in what you spoke to, that the laws of nature, everything is perfect as it is, that they're already, that the root of some of our suffering arises because we think that things should be different than they are. And I personally think a lot of my life, a lot of my path has also been maybe one geared towards service and action. And so that's very deeply with me. But my internal struggle also with that is that, I'm taking action in the world to in some way alleviate the suffering that my engagement in also, right? Like There's doctors because there's sick people. There would not be a need for healers without sick people. There's police officers because there's criminals. You know, there's political activists because there's imperial capitalists, right? And so these functions and ways of being sustain one another. So like by the nature of my very involvement also perpetuates the cycle, even if I stand on a side that I inherently hold as beneficial to be on, maybe that is in some way. And so I wrestle with that personally, and I think it reminds me of like Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, with his engaged Buddhism and how he was exiled from Vietnam for choosing that path, you know, when all the other Buddhists were probably in the monasteries as bombs were dropping in Vietnam. And we've had some of these conversations, you know, with obviously there's no answers that we arrived at, but I'm curious, like with your work in particular, how do you like mesh those bodhisattva path with a tantra type of orientation and also this like social activist ideals, you know?
Woo, that is a massive question. Try to come with a concise answer, but yeah, this is light powder. That's fine. So, yogic system, contemplative systems, Buddhist system, tantric system are all made in the design of nature. Also, human body is in the design of nature. We're part and parcel of nature. And so in walking these yogic paths, these inner paths, these spiritual paths, we spend quite a bit of time in exactly what you described. I affectionately call it like the badminton match, right? In these dualistic structures, kind of getting battered around. You know, good exists because of bad, and you know, these roles that emerge as you have named them, these oppositional roles. And it would seem that they do a very good job of multiplying. And they have a domain where they exist. We can say cosmology, Buddhist cosmology of Trikaya, for example. Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, Dharmakaya, personal body, universal, so personal realm, universal realm, transcendental realm, right? So long, we're in the personal realm. We are in the badminton match. The whole construct is a construct of opposites. So what are we doing internally in the practices? We do the kriya. We do asana, pranayam, pratyahar. Once we're getting towards dharana, we are then doing an interplay of opposites. So it's now we're finding there's a way to there's a movement between the opposites. And we play that game enough, interplay of opposites between the two lobes of the brain, whatever's the meditative technique. And we find a third space emerges. Remember I described my own academic work like this? I take indigenous traditions and I put them in conversation with each other. I'm able to do restoration work within that. But from that interplay of conversation, a third space emerges. That's the entry point to Nirmanakaya and all the states of consciousness that go along with that. And so you can't get there by cheating, aka bypassing and gaslighting. You have to suffer through the discomfort of one set of opposite after another. You have to be the prison guard and you have to be the prisoner. You utilize the human superpower of empathy to put yourself in the various perspectival experiences. In a context of decolonization, oppressor, oppressed. Because what we then can learn from that interplay of opposites through embodied processes. It cannot just be a mental game. But through embodied processes, what we can discover is that the oppressor is oppressed. And that then we're finally graduating into this potential third space, where now the identity of oppressor and oppressed release their stronghold. And we discover that there is a universal identity this whole time. And that universal identity has also stages. You know, it's not just like automatic perfection. There are some finer superiority complexes there. This is the domain of the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the intellect layer. That's a yogic interpretation. A tantric interpretation, you know, has us in a very specific set of the Niruttara Tantras, you know, and another interpretation, you know, is going to describe these states of being as, you know, bodhicitta, Buddhism, bodhicitta, Vajrayana, and Vajrachitta, the indestructible mind consciousness, Vajrachitta, bodhicitta, the pure mind consciousness. There's a few steps before we get to that. There's a few other stages, you know, of constructs and things. Are we looking through the lens of Samkhya philosophy? Well, we could start naming, you know, Sat Chit Ananda and la 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 la. Right? This is the fun of comparative work. And so, like this, we can't get there without saturation of all the badminton matches. So we can't get like morally bogged down that the Nirmanakaya, that the personal realm is the way it is. This is one of those moments. Yep, it is what it is, right? Or are we going to roll up our sleeves and get in the muck, right? Are we going to take the spoon and stir the muck within? Are we going to do that in a responsible way? I will say, I do believe that many of the approaches of DEI anti-oppression work are flawed. They're not embodied. So you got people out here stirring the pot and you've given them no tools whatsoever to deal with the muck. That doesn't make any sense. What are the tools that we have? The actual engagement tool. You're learning it. It's the Ashtanga system. We can come from so many entry points, so many cosmologies, so many lineages, so many wisdom traditions. Each one will take us down this path. Sufi, this one, that one. They will all describe this path. Now the fun, or maybe it's not fun, I don't know, is that scientific reasoning has us thinking that truth is an absolute thing. And if we're going to look at the latest update of the tantras in the forms of Vajrayana Tantra, what we'll learn about is the truth is a paradox. Wait, what? That same badminton match all the way down in the personal realm is actually also the design of the very truth of existence itself, other than the truth of existence as void. Right? So if the ultimate experience of Dharmakaya is the truth of existence is void. Shunya, shunyata, void, voidness. Sometimes translated as empty or emptiness, right? The second we come into somethingness, the mirror, that's that clear mirror state. Vajrachitta bodhicitta, like that. And then only from that held state of the reflection of the nothingness of existence, we come to the truth of things, that all things in existence are ultimately paradoxical. And we're just here playing one badminton match after another. The question is, are you having fun? Are you enjoying yourself? And in particular, are you enjoying the suffering? That is the key. But that's a different talk. We're just talking about decolonization, or are we? I don't know. So friends, our time has come to a conclusion. This has been a lot of fun for me too. So be enriched and be in touch.
Right. Thank you very, very much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Bye bye.
Emma.
Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Ah, bisous.